just reading my comments on the Richard Carrier video that I posted. He's a popular atheist. I think he's one of the has the weakest arguments for atheism. There was better arguments in the past that have already been refuted. And so what I get comments is people that are very new to themselves being an atheist, and they've never read the literature. They say, atheists don't believe that. And they say, we don't believe in this and that. We know. And so they presuppose that they know. Well, where do you think knowledge comes from? Knowledge comes from a belief in what any evidence that you see is good evidence or good proof of whatever view or worldview you want to hold to. So that's what evidence is. And they say, I know. I don't believe I know for a fact, right? Well, isn't that still a presupposition? Of course it is. And so just to counter this ridiculous claim of the atheist saying, I don't believe, I know, just tell them the same thing back to them and see if they start going nuts. Say, I know God exists. I've met him. I've felt his presence. Everything that I think of when it comes to the evidence points straight to God. If they say that's a bad argument, you're presupposing the truth of theism. I say, just like you're presupposing the truth of atheism. We have to look at the evidence, but I would argue from a presuppositional apologetic that all evidence points to God. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, I'll say just the idea or the proof of any evidence. Just because we can have evidence in a world that is purely out of nowhere, chaos, randomness, I would say evidence, if evidence does exist at all, I'm not saying evidence for one way or the other. I'm saying if there is such thing as evidence that points to a specific worldview, I would say it must point to God. It must point to its creator. Because if you have a universe that is random, evidence would be impossible for either side. Evidence by definition proves God exists, because we would have to rely on our own brains to interpret that evidence, to interpret the fact that we're looking at something that points to something else. It's pointing to a specific direction. If you say all the evidence is that theists give is not convincing, well, all the evidence that atheists give is also not convincing. That's not an argument. You need to first argue for a worldview that supports evidence, knowledge, and also humans relying on their brain to interpret evidence properly. If just hear this from the outset. If you really trust your brain, if you trust your brain in any way to look at evidence objectively, you already presuppose that the brain that you are holding in your head, in your skull, was created by a creator. Because if it was not, then you couldn't rely on that brain. You couldn't rely on your brain at all for interpreting anything properly, because your brain was not made for interpreting reality. It was created by random chance that has no purpose at all. So why would you trust your brain if it's purposeless? You say survival. True. It could be for survival. But if it's for survival, then it had to have a creator regardless. Because only a brain that you can trust, you can rely on. If you say everything in my mind is an illusion or my brain's an illusion, then you couldn't trust anything you believe at all. So the argument, again, it goes all the way back to your own subjectivity. It goes back to your brain. If you really trust your brain to look at evidence and interpret it properly or objectively, then you also have to rely on the fact that your brain was not created by random chance. It was created by your creator, who is God himself.
That's my brain. Look at it. It's lighting up like a city at night. All those little sparks, every memory, every idea. That's me in there. I built a jar just to hold my own thoughts. That's wild. You see that curve? That's where the pizza cravings live. Incredible.